Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I won't put you to sleep over the evening. I'm just going to give you a bit of background into the how the lighthouses came about in Ontario, and a few of the early Great Lakes lighthouses. Well, what happened was that they were a little slow, I guess, getting lighthouses built in what was called Upper Canada and then Canada West in the early 1800s. But in 1804, they built their first lighthouse at Mississauga Point. That was in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It is approximately where the golf course is now. You know, where you come off Mississauga Street and then turn onto the main drag. That's approximately where it was. Gibraltar Point in 1808, that's off of Toronto Islands. That's a neat little light. An amazing story of bootlegging and murder and lightkeeper disappearing. Typical, you know, great little light. There was False Ducks built in Lake Ontario in 1828. Next one. Long Point on Lake Erie. Next. Pelee Island also on Lake Erie. Mohawk in 1844. That was John Brown, the gentleman who built Nottawasaga. That was the first lighthouse he built. It's still standing. And it wasn't until 1847 that they built their first lighthouse on the Upper Lakes on Lake Huron there at Goderich. Next slide. Well, by 1850, in the Great Lakes, the Upper Great Lakes, there were 969 schooners, 203 propellers, 147 steamers, 86 brigs, 62 barks, and 15 sloops, all running around the Great Lakes. And they were running on the rocks and banging into each other and getting caught in storms. And oh, it was the Wild West, really. The only qualification you really had at that point to be a ship operator and be a captain is you find yourself a ship. And out you go, you're the captain. Well, you know, that worked very, very well considering there's thousands of the darn things on the bottom of the Great Lakes right now. So anyhow, there were a lot of demands brought on by ship owners and the public alike to, you know, provide some aids to navigation. So the government of Canada West decided to build the Imperial Towers. And they originally planned to build 11 of them, as listed there, but they only wound up building 6 of them. You know, it was strange back then, in, you know, the 1850s as it is today, in 2019, government public works projects went over budget. So instead of building the 11, they only built the 6. Whitefish, Mississauga, Joseph, Clapperton, and Badgley were never built as Imperial Towers. They were built as lighthouses, but cheaper wooden ones. Well, the government wanted a gentleman who had the experience in building such structures. And John Brown had already built, you know, Mohawk Light in Lake Erie. And he was a stonemason from Scotland who came over and immigrated here. He had a number of quarries down in the Niagara Way, and he worked on Fort Niagara and did some work on the first Welling Canal. Well, as the project got going, he lost ships, barges got caught in storms, ran on the rocks. He had difficulties with surveying and getting materials and men to, build on these sites. Because in the 1850s, it was essentially the end of the earth up here. Really. Collingwood was just incorporated in 1858. Other smaller towns like Southampton and that, they were just getting started. And Cove Island on the top of the Bruce Peninsula, well, there was nothing there. Nothing. Tobermory didn't even exist back then. I think Owen Sound or Wyerton was the closest town. So it wound up, instead of costing approximately $35,000 to build the lake, it cost $82,400 to build them. Next one. By the time they did all the surveys, the vessels, paid the workmen and the engineers, that added another $65,000 to the bill. And the lighting apparatus, which had to come all the way from Paris, France, made by Louis Sauteur. And I have one of the original Fresnel lenses at the back there. It's out of Nottawasaga's sister Cove Island, but the same lens would have been in here. So that came to the grand total of almost $250,000 back in 1855. Poor old John Brown, he wound up having to petition the government because of the cost overruns. And because he lost about 1,500 pounds or about $6,000 on each lighthouse. So that'd be about $36,000 he lost back then. Obviously he got the money, because when he died in 1876, I believe, he was quite well off. So he came out all right. Well, they started building the lights. Construction started in 1856. And, 1855, and by 1856, part of the tower and part of the dwelling were completed. And by 1857, the stonework on the tower was complete. But they didn't have the lenses, because they had to come from France. So they just put a lantern on top of the stone and had hired a guy to take care of that. The lanterns themselves, they got stuck in Halifax for custom duties. They were supposed to be duty-free. Then they managed to get them as far as Montreal, and then there was canal tolls, and that held them up. Then it wound up getting to Toronto, and it sat there for a while in a warehouse. So finally, by late fall, early winter of 1857, they made their way to Collingwood. But it was too late to install them in 1857. So, 1858, the early summer, they even had troubles getting workmen to install them, because they didn't quite know how to fit everything together. And because you're looking at the lenses, the lantern pedestals, the drive mechanisms, even the lantern room itself, all came from France. So they had to bring a crew out from France. A gentleman named Louis Saint-Aubin came out, and in October 30th, 1858, Cove Island was the first Imperial Tower to be lit. And then the following month, November 30th, Nottawasaga was lit. Yep. Griffith was next. Chantry in April, 59. Point Clark on the same day, and finally Christian Island was built, was lit. So they were all functional. Next one. Well, as the light started, close to getting finished, there were a lot of applications that came in from all over Canada West at that time for the job of lightkeeper, because it was quite a sought-after position. And George Collins, Captain George Collins of Collingwood, he applied for the job. And in the recommendation and in his application, they told him, said that he was an industrious, attentive, and sober individual. Well, as it happened, there was another gentleman that applied for a lighthouse job named David McBeath. And David, he applied for the job at Isle of Coves, as it was called then, or Cove Island. Well, in May of 1858, George received a letter stating, "Report to the Isle of Coves." And shortly thereafter, Mr. McBeath got a letter saying, "Report to Nottawasaga." Who knows? Anyhow, George Collins and his wife Sophia and their young son Charles, they trekked off to Cove Island. And he faithfully did his duties, the best he could. And but despite all the controversy, and there was a lot of controversy because he wasn't happy there, and he was quite frankly miserable. His assistant, John Merrill, quit. He couldn't take it, so he wound up, his wife Sophia wound up being the assistant keeper. And in that first winter, George wrote in a letter, "Everything wet and freezing around us, and the cold and damp air sticks against the chimney. I shall do all in my power to keep a good as light as possible." And in another letter he said, "It rained all night for the most part and came through the lantern glass in all directions. I had the watch from midnight till daylight. During the time I sponged 4 bucketfuls of water. It ran down the walls to the 3rd floor below." So he didn't have a very good time out there. Well, as the previous slide shows, George and David McBeath, they exchanged letters. And because David, he was willing to go to Cove Island, so a year later, 1859, they switched. And George became the lightkeeper at Nottawasaga till he retired about 1890. He was quite the pillar of the community and very, very highly regarded. In fact, at his funeral, I think they lowered all the flags in Collingwood to half-mast. David McBeath, when he got to Cove Island, it's a quite interesting story in that in December of 1860, at that time he had his wife Mary Jane, he had 5 kids out there. But they didn't get their provisions for the winter. At that time, up until the early 20th century, they stayed out there all year round. So David managed to get word to Collingwood, where the collector of customs and the postmaster made arrangements with Captain Dick, who had a steamer that was still hadn't been laid up for the winter, to take provisions out to Mr. McBeath and his family. And when Captain Dick got to the Isle of Coves, McBeath and his family were getting on a makeshift raft and going to head for civilization, which would have been Wyerton or Owen Sound at that time. The real interesting fact is that the name of Captain Dick's vessel was called Rescue. So, and these are the lightkeepers that served at Nottawasaga. The first two, Archibald McDougall and Robert Mills, they were temporary workers that just maintained that lantern sitting on top of the stonework. But David McBeath, he was the first official lightkeeper. A couple of women there, Sarah Clark served for a bit after her husband died, and Annie McNabb as well served for a couple of years as lightkeepers. So, and then in 1959, the house caught fire, and that was the end of the live on the island lightkeepers. The last three just went out by boat and provided maintenance. And then in 1983, that was it, totally automated. Thank you. Well, just to give you a little overview, I guess, of the tower itself. Well, in 2002, it started developing cracks and a bulge. And what happened there is the Coast Guard, in ease of maintenance, put on a white cement type coating, which was hard and brittle. And if it started to crack or fail, water would get inside, and the freeze thaw in the winter would just wreak havoc on the inside, and that's what happened. And then in 2004, a lightning strike in November of that year, just all that moisture stuck in the stone just vaporized and just blew the wall right off. And that's what we had. And then in 2010, Coast Guard decommissioned the light and put a buoy out there. Next one. Just some of the architectural details. The picture on the left there, that's the lantern room. That whole structure came from France. It's the roof is copper, and the insides are iron and bronze. It's all been covered over with ugly gray paint, but we're going to correct that. And on the right there is a bronze lion's head gargoyle. I have one at the back there. It's a replica. And these lion's heads, they sat right up here under, and there were 13 of them, and they acted as the downspouts. So when it rained, water came pouring out their mouth. So it was pretty neat. Penny's going to pass it around. Yeah. This one is a replica I had made in Georgian at a casting company from an original. Too bad I had to give the original back, but I wanted to keep it. But it's exact. You couldn't tell the difference. Next slide. Now, I often refer to Cove Island, her sister, and that's Cove there on the right, Nottawasaga in the heyday on the left. And I use those pictures to give an indication of what we hope the place will look like when we're done. Both, the houses there, the foundation is still there out in the island, so we're going to rebuild that when we procure the stone at the same time as the tower. And there was a little work shed in between, as you can see in both pictures, and we'll rebuild those as well. Maybe we put a small little museum or something out there or something yet. Not too sure, but that's just to give you an idea of what she'll look like when she's done. Next slide. Now, the construction, just to give you an idea why it hasn't fallen down by now. The picture on the right, there are two walls. There's an inside cylinder and an outside cone. And in between those two walls, there's loose stone packed with sand. Now, it's that outside cone that's come off. And luckily that the inside cylinder is the structural wall. And 2 years ago, Stantec Engineering did some tests, and it's straight plumb. It's not shifting or warping or anything like that. So any thoughts of it look like it was leaning is just an optical illusion. It's straight. Next. These are just some of the pictures on the inside going up the tower. A lot of the wood inside is still original from 1858. A lot of the steps are, and that was back in the day when a 2x4 was actually 2 inches by 4 inches. None of this milled stuff, right? So the floor joists are 3x10. So any wood replacement or wood repairs we do in there, we will be getting the proper wood milled, custom milled. There's the tower, and the upper right, that's the bottom of the pedestal where the lamp sat, the coal oil lamp, or when it was first lit, it was whale oil sat. That mechanism was probably 2 tons. Nothing was light. Each one of those lenses is about 50 pounds. So it was a struggle getting that down the steps at Cove Island, I'll tell you. And the bottom right there, that's the inside roof of the lantern room itself. That's a deflector roof. It's concave, and the smoke and the gases went up through that center hole and out through that pinnacle ball that you see on the top of the top of the roof. Next one. Well, in 2016, we had noticed that some more and more stone was coming off the side of the tower. And we were really concerned that because that inner wall is now exposed to the rain and the wind and the freezing and the thawing, that it wasn't going to last much longer. So we went and asked the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which is the government department that's actually the custodian of the light, if we could wrap it. And lo and behold, they said, okay. Which shocked, I figured 5 million questions. But we decided to wrap it. So we got Morgan Weatherall, Meaford, and his 100-ton barge, and a boom, and a backhoe, and next one. And we proceeded to wrap it. There's Earl, our contractor. Earl came all the way out from Vancouver to do this for us. He's one crazy person, I'll tell you. Anyhow, next slide. And there's a picture up there from the boom. So we had to knock all that loose, a lot of the loose stone off because the steel bands were holding it in. And it, And every time it got hit by lightning or something, more and more would come down. So we knocked a few tons of loose stone off. And then Bill Brown Lumber gave us all this wood, surplus wood, to scrap it. And then we would put the wrap on top of the wood. That was just to allow air to circulate. It's open at the bottom and the top, and it allows the air to circulate in there to keep the inside dry. That's the critical part. And lo and behold, there she was. It was a wrap. And on December 7th, we finished the wrapping. But there was one catch. That was the second time we wrapped it. The first time we put the wrapping on, the weather was going to change, so we thought we'd better get out and come back after the storm and then strap it to hold the plastic together. Well, we had one of those 100-year gales, which we've had a few since then too, I think, and it just ripped at the shreds. Yeah, you know, it lasted 2 days. Well, the government thought we were done. We swore and jumped up and down and cried and just about everything else, but we found an alternative material. It's a truck tarp we found, just like you see on transport trucks, covered with loose tarpaulin. And it's lasted 3 years. So, next slide. So where are we today? Well, we've been going back and forth. We had to do, in order for the government to transfer the light to us, we had to go through an Indigenous land claim study. So 9 bands were consulted, and none of them had a real interest in the island at all. They had no interest whatsoever. That was good, and that took 9 months. The only band that had some interest is the Chippewas of Nawash, which are out of Wyerton, Cape Croker. And they just want to be kept in the loop. They're concerned about fishing rights out there in Georgian Bay, but the fish population out there isn't very plentiful. The 3,000 seagulls and cormorants have taken care of that. So we've also just been completing an environmental study. There's a lot of contaminants around lighthouses. You've got lead, mercury, hydrocarbons. Because it's been closed up for a number of years, there's a lot of mold inside. So the first task will be when we get ownership, or ownership is imminent, is that we will have an environmental remediation done out there. So it's safe to go in the towers. We're sourcing the stone. Apparently the stone came from a small quarry near Craigleith. Now I've never found it, but some of you who've spent your whole lives up here might know where that quarry is. But for our needs, there are 2 quarries, one in Owen Sound, one near Wyerton, that will provide the proper stone that we need. And each block is about 22 inches by 9 inches by about 9.5 inches deep. So they're big blocks, and there's thousands of them. We've also sourcing scaffolding. We found the company near Caledon who is going to provide us with the scaffolding at cost. In order to save money, we are going to buy the scaffold and then sell it when we're finished after 2 years. It's far cheaper. and we could get 50 to 60% of the cost of the scaffolding by reselling it. So it's far, far, far cheaper to buy. A docking facility. What we need is a real docking facility out there. The point we used on the southeast point of the island in 2016, it was easy to get on and off the shore, but it was pretty exposed to the wind. And we had some pretty severe storms out there, and we nearly destroyed a Howie Outer Bridges Boston whaler in the whole process. So that spot isn't going to be good enough. So we have found the original dock on the south end of the island. So we've got an application with the Ontario Department of Natural Resources to put a dock in. You see, the federal government owns the top of the water. The province owns the bottom. And the natives control everything in between. Only in Canada, eh? So we're on that right now. And we're talking with DFO by email and by telephone. And we're close, you know, we're at that point where we can almost reach it, you know, but it just keeps inching further. But when I asked him about a month ago, you know, got a timeline on it, he said sooner than later. Whatever that means. But we're getting some engineering drawings sent to them hopefully this week, done by Tatham Engineering for us, again at a good price. And hopefully we will be talking later in the week or early next week and say let's get this going, because we want to get the dock in and at the same time do the environmental remediation this fall. That's the goal. And if we can do that, then in 2020 we will get the scaffolding out there, procure the stone, get the site ready, and then by 21 we will start putting the stone up. So sounds like an ambitious plan, but we spread it out. You know, by spreading it out over a 5-year time frame, it's good bite-sized pieces, we think, to do that. So it's, and what was I going to say now? I can't remember. Anyhow, yeah, so that's where we're at. Yeah, we're going to launch a major capital campaign. We're hiring a consultant who has a place here in Collingwood. You know, we could probably raise the necessary $2.5 million on our own, but we figured that a consultant would be the best route to go. It would be smoother, easier, and quicker to do it. The original estimate to restore the tower in 2006 was $4.5 million. The government did a revised estimate last year, and it came in at about $9.5 million. Because we are a charity nonprofit, we have gotten a lot of supporters who supply us expertise materials at cost or for nothing at all. So we figure we can do it for about $2.5 million. So, next slide. So, how can you help? Well, as Penny mentioned, we have a great deal here. Join, become a member, won't cost you anything. And then, you know, you'll get the emails, updates, and you can keep in touch, or You can volunteer on a committee, if you like talking to people. We would like to be at the market every Saturday morning, so there's always room to come out and talk and tell people about the lighthouse. We have a buy a block campaign, where you can actually buy one of the stone blocks and then your name will get put on a plaque, big plaques, you know, supported by these people. And just spread the word. Just spread the word. You know, you follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We have a web page, nlps.info. And, you know, we do little things. One of our members, Eleanor, who lives at Lighthouse Point, she collects all the empty liquor and beer bottles generated by that place. My residence, by the way. And so far, since she started, I believe was almost 2 years ago,
Yeah.
$9,400.
20 cents at a time.
So you can imagine what we do there in our spare time. So that's about it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll hang around at the back there and talk to you about things and answer questions if it's okay.
Most definitely.
Yeah,
Yep.
sure.
Yes. Now, when you get the lighthouse from DFO, does that include the island?
Yes,
So you will own the island and the lighthouse?
yes,
Good. That's
for the price of $1.
Right.
Sweet.
Yes, it's the only government structures that they can sell for $1 are lighthouses. And there's 349 of them on the block. Any other question? Sir, front here.
How's the buoy system working in the meantime?
The buoy system
For safety?
for safety?
Yeah.
Fairly well. Fairly well, yeah. But the goal is, we asked them in our initial proposal too, that would they consider relighting of it? And they sort of went, possible. So that would be good, yeah, to relight it and discontinue one or two of the buoys that replaced it.
Another question. You mentioned the lighthouse, which is a great lightning rod being struck by lightning a lot.
Yes.
How does it affect the inside? Anybody inside or the equipment itself?
Well, as long as you're not in the lantern room, you should be okay. I know, I'm still here. Because of the other than the lantern room and the top floor being metal, everything else in the tower is wood, so it's not conductive at all. It shakes, it rattles, you get dust, the hair on your body, I was going to say the hair on my head. It all stands
That's where
up.
it went.
Yes, it all stands up, but you're okay. You have a question? Yes, sir.
Is there any involvement of the town with what you're doing?
Just symbolically, which is okay. Which is okay. We can do it on our own without, the town getting too heavily involved. And one thing I just neglected to mention, when we do get the light, and this is one of the only real estate transaction I can ever think of where the selling party actually gives the buying party money. Because it's been in a severe state of decay over the years, they will give us a substantial amount to offset the foregone maintenance of the light. We're looking at a few $100,000 here.
So it should.
There was Eleanor.
There's another way you can help if you don't live at Lighthouse Point.
Oh,
And that is take your empties to the beer store
I was gonna say.
and donate them. whatever you get for your empties. There is a donation jar in the beer store. They're very cooperative in this way, but they won't let us have this jar in view. So you have to tell them that you want to donate to the lighthouse jar. It's kept under the countertop by the cash register. So we would appreciate any donations in that way. And when I take the load in, I load up my cart.